Hi, Sophia. This is Sheree. Did I dial into the right
You sure did.
meeting?
Yes, thank you.
All right, just want to make sure. Thank you. I'll
Oh,
go back.
you're welcome.
Did we get everybody signed on, Sophia?
Almost. I'm just pushing over Mr. Haney now. And Myrna, I think, is online. And I think we have everybody else. Now that Myrna's on, I'll ask her to
Tim's here.
To call roll whenever you're ready.
Okay. Okay, well, let's get started. Okay, good evening, everyone. Today is Tuesday, April 6th, 2021, and the time is 6:02. It's a regularly scheduled meeting of the City of Georgetown Planning and Zoning Commission. This time, Myrna, will you please call the roll so we can establish which commissioners are present and determine if we have a quorum?
Yes, Sheree Heinzman,
Here.
Kayla McCord,
Here.
Tim Haney,
Here.
Travis Berthews, Jay Warren,
Ma'am, yes, ma'am.
Doug Noble,
Here.
Chris Stanley.
Here.
Myrna, it appears that the chair may have just gotten frozen for a second. We may just give him just a second to log back in here. For the rest of the commissioners, as we wait for our chair to reestablish a connection here, if you run into any technical, there's our chair. If you run into any technical difficulties, please chat or let us know. We're here to help you.
I'm back. Sorry, Suddenlink has not been very reliable the last couple weeks in my house. So, but I've got Sheree, Kayla, Tim, myself.
Myrna, oops. Travis, are you back? Looks like he.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, you just look like you froze again for a little bit. I think we just caught you mid-sentence where you were announcing the regular commissioners.
Right, so I have Sheree, Kayla, Tim, and myself. That's how far I got, and then it cut out.
Myrna, will you please share the commissioners that are sitting on the dais today as regular members?
Yep. Cherie Heinzman, Kayla McCord, Tim Haney, Travis Perthews, Jay Warren, Doug Noble, Chris Stanley.
Okay, so we should have plenty. Okay. This time to remind everyone that the complete agenda for tonight's meeting and all supporting documents have been posted to the city's website. If you have any questions on locating this information, please reach out to the planning department staff. Tonight's meeting will consist of 3 parts: the regular agenda, the consent agenda, and the legislative agenda. So tonight's regular agenda includes items A through D. And before we get started on that, I'd ask Sophia to run through the basics of how this Zoom meeting will work.
Yes, thank you for that opportunity. Commissioners and for the audience, we ask just from a sound quality perspective that if you aren't speaking at the time to please mute yourself until you are ready to speak. We also ask that you please announce yourself and let us know your name so that we can take accurate minutes when you're speaking, and so the audience also knows who's speaking at a given time. From a public hearing perspective, when the chair opens a public meeting, for those in the audience that are wanting to speak, you can enter your name into the chat and let us know the item that you want to speak on and your name, and we'll call you out at the appropriate time. You can also raise your hand during that particular item, and we'll also acknowledge you to speak at that whenever that particular public hearing is being called. If you have any technical challenges, both for the audience and for commissioners, please feel free to chat any concerns that you may have. I'm on the receiving end of that chat, while others may be presenting. I'm happy to support in any way that I may be able to. The chair, that's all I have at the moment. Thank you. Oh, excuse me, Chair. I think you're on mute.
So our first item on the regular session is item A, nomination and selection of a vice chair for the 2021-2022 year. So do we have any nominations for vice chair?
This is Kayla McCord. I would nominate Cherie Heinzman if she is willing to serve.
Okay.
Thank you, Kayla.
So we have a nomination from Commissioner McCord for Commissioner Heinzman. Do we have a second on that?
Tim Haney, I'll second that.
Is that how we're going to handle these?
Yes, a motion and a second was made, and then Myrna can call roll.
Okay. So we have a motion and a second. So Myrna, you can call the roll.
Cherie Heinzman,
Now, Myrna, don't I have to abstain on
no.
this vote? Okay. Yes.
Kayla McCord,
Yes.
Tim Haney,
Yes.
Travis Perthews,
Yes.
Jay Warren,
Yeah.
Doug Noble, Chris Stanley.
Yes.
So that's 7 votes to 0. So that motion passes. So next is, do do we have a motion for Planning and Zoning Commission 2021-2022 Secretary?
Travis, this is Sheree. I'd like to go ahead and nominate Tim Haney as secretary for planning and zoning.
Okay. Nomination for Commissioner Haney. Do we have a second?
Second, this is Chris Stanley.
A second, Commissioner Stanley. Murray, call the roll.
Sheree Heinzman,
Yes.
Kayla McCord,
Yes.
Tim Haney,
Yes.
Travis Perthews,
Yes.
Jay Warren,
Yes.
Doug Noble,
Yes.
Chris Stanley.
Yes.
That item passes 7-0. The next item is item C, which is discussion and possible action to approve a meeting time, date, and place for the 2021-2022 year. Do we have guidelines on that, Adrina or Sophia? I mean, I assume that, I guess, can I make a motion that it's the first and third Tuesday of the month at 6 o'clock?
Yes, and we can even include it in there that the meeting will take place at the council chamber or Zoom as the virtual meetings are allowed.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. I'm not gonna put forth a motion that we do it over Zoom. If we have to, that's fine, but
Right,
that's not my choice.
correct.
Okay, so can I make a motion so we can get going?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I'll make a motion that the 2021-2022 year Planning and Zoning Commission meetings occur the first and third Tuesday of the month at 6 o'clock in the Georgetown City Council chambers.
I'll second that.
Tim or Chris, whichever.
Okay, so we have a second. I heard Commissioner Haney there, so Murray, can you call the roll on that?
Sheree Heinzman,
Yes.
Kayla McCord,
Yes.
Tim Haney,
Yes.
Travis Perthews,
Yes.
Jay Warren,
No.
Doug Noble,
Yes.
Chris Stanley.
Yes.
So that was 6-1, if I heard that correctly. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, passes 6-1. Okay, so item D is consideration and possible action to confirm the bylaws for the Planning and Zoning Commission. And Sophia presenting this item.
Yes, Chairman. So this, it's kind of like as a recapping of the bylaws that we briefly went over at the training workshop session at 5 o'clock, but it really, it aligns the meeting standards and procedures, the officers. And so these are adopted and approved by the city council. However, we do, it is our practice to also ask the commission to confirm those bylaws in basically agreeing to, yes, you will be abiding by those rules and standards. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have specific to the bylaws.
Okay.
I'll make a motion that we adopt the bylaws.
Second, this is Chris.
A motion to confirm the bylaws for the Planning and Zoning Commission. Commissioner Haney. And second by Commissioner Stanley. So let's call the roll on that item.
Sheree Heinzman,
Yes.
Kayla McCord,
Yes.
Tim Haney,
Yes.
Travis Perthews,
Yes.
Jay Warren,
Yes.
Doug Noble,
Yes.
Chris Stanley.
Yes.
Okay, so that item passes 7-0. Okay, so let's see here. So next item on the regular agenda is public wishing to address the board. Persons may add an item to any future board meetings by filling out a written request with staff no later than 1 week prior to the board meeting. The request must include the speaker's name, specific topic to be addressed, and sufficient information to inform the board. At this time, we have no items on the agenda and no person signed up to address the board. That's still the case, correct? Okay, so that takes us to the consent agenda, which includes routine and non-controversial items along with items that do not require a public hearing. Tonight's consent agenda consists of items F through AQ. And
Mr. Chairman,
yes,
this is Chris Stanley. I've got to recuse
On
off
item
of
P?
the Yes, sir.
got it. Yeah.
Thanks.
So we will call that. So yeah, at this time I'll ask if there's any items that any commissioners wish or need to abstain on. And Commissioner Stanley and myself are both recusals on item P. Do we have any other? Okay, not hearing anyone.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, it's not, we do have one item that we have received a request from the applicant of wanting to, asking the Planning and Zoning Commission to postpone taking action on it. That is item. That is item R. So if I wanted to bring it to your attention so that we can pull that item from the consent agenda and bring it into the legislative regular agenda.
So they asked that we not. So,
That you-
so in doing that, we have to pull it and then.
Correct. So what they specifically have asked for is that under Chapter 212 of the Local Government Code, an applicant has the option to request up to a 30-day extension from taking action. And so we kind of like a last minute request, we received that request from the applicant asking for the Planning and Zoning Commission, instead of taking action tonight, to disapprove the request, which is staff's recommendation, is that you take action to continue that item for up to 30 days so that the applicant can address some of those comments and come back to the Planning and Zoning Commission with the comments being addressed.
Okay, makes sense. So we're gonna pull item R, recusals on item P. Any other items? Do we have anyone from the public here that would like to pull an item from the consent agenda other than item R? Okay, not hearing anyone. Commissioners, this time the floor is open to a motion.
This is Kayla McCord. I have a question. Do we need to move item P to the legislative agenda so that it can be voted upon separately?
I believe that's probably the easiest, correct? Yeah.
Correct.
Okay, then in that case, I move that we accept the consent agenda, items F through AQ, as presented by staff, with the exception of items P and R.
And this is Commissioner Heinzman. I second that motion.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner McCord, a second by Commissioner Heinzman. Do we have any discussion? We've got some new people on, so otherwise, Marie, please call the roll.
Cherie Heinzman,
Yes.
Kayla McCord,
Yes,
Tim Haney,
Yes.
Travis Perthes,
Yes.
Jay Warren,
Ma'am, yes, ma'am.
Doug Noble,
Yes.
Chris Stanley.
Yes.
So consent passes 7-0. So that brings us to the legislative portion of the meeting. So do we want to, I guess we can, if we do these in order, we can do item P, then item R, and then move into item AR. Okay, so item P would be Michael's item, which is 2020-20-PFP.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, the subject for 2020 PFP is consideration and possible action to disapprove for the reasons set forth in the item an application for a preliminary final plat combo consisting of approximately 0.64 acres in the Clement Stubblefield Survey, abstract number 558, generally located at 600 Montgomery Street, to be known as Snowy 706. Again, this item is currently up for disapproval based on findings. I believe we had outstanding fiscal surety and one or two other very, very minor comments that I believe the applicant has addressed with their new submittal that we did receive on Monday. So I would anticipate this being no obstacles with this, the next round being for approval.
Okay, let's see. Let's see. Here. So being on recusal, I know that the applicant's not on the meeting. So commissioners, do you have any questions? Let's see. So I guess
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
if since you have recused from the item, we can ask our new vice chair, Ms. Commissioner Heisman, to run the meeting with this item, and then
fair enough. I felt like that was kind of insult to injury, but
All right, I'll step in and just go back here. I think we heard a dissenting vote here from one of the dogs. All right, as pertains to item P, do we have a recommendation by the commissioners for a motion, please?
Kayla McCord, move to disapprove for the reasons set forth in the item, the
right.
application for a preliminary final plat combo as requested in item P.
Adriana, do we need to open and close public hearing before everybody votes?
there is not a required public hearing. However, if there are, if we do have members of the applicant, of the public, I apologize, that have signed up to speak, we can certainly call them to be able to speak on that item. I do see here that we have a hand that's been raised.
Mr. Josh Barron.
Hi, this is.
McCord, I withdraw my motion.
All right. Sorry, Mr. Barron, I didn't realize that your hand was raised. Would you like to address the commissions, please?
No worries. I'm the applicant's engineer, Josh Barron with JAB Engineering, 110 Landon's Way. And I just wanted to note that there were only 2 comments left remaining. Fiscal has been posted, everything's been addressed and uploaded. And since it was pulled from the agenda to actually speak to, those items are addressed. So if there's any possibility of an approval, that's what we would be looking for.
All right. Are there any questions from the commissioners to Mr. Barron? All right, not hearing any questions. Sophia, I'm going to ask for some guidance here. Does the applicant have the ability to either one pull this or what?
I'd like to give staff the opportunity first to be able to comment on the status of this application and why it was recommended for denial. I think that's the most appropriate next step.
All right, that'd be great. So who would be presenting from staff, please?
That would be me. Yes, there were two items of consideration. One is we had one technical comment that we needed to change, and the other, as Mr. Barron noted, is that the physical surety needed to be satisfied. Per the recent House Bill 3167, we are required to present the items as they are presented to the P&Z at the time of submittal, which would have been March 22nd. So while the applicant has provided new information since then, yesterday, to go into the next round of submittal, we are not able to revise plans in the middle of submittal deadlines. So whatever items Mr. Barron had submitted to staff on the 22nd, it is only those documents that we are able to make a determination on. And within those documents, we were at the time missing fiscal surety and did have an additional technical comment.
All right. So the applicant will have the ability to resubmit, correct?
Correct, and they already have. Yes, we received their revised on Monday.
Okay. All right. Well, we just have to go with what we have presented tonight. So with that being said, do I have are there any other questions? Any other comments? All right. At this time, I'd like to once again move for a motion from the commissioners, please.
Kayla McCord, I'd like to reinstate my motion to disapprove the application for a preliminary final plat combo for the reasons set forth in the item, with apologies to the applicant.
Thank you.
Jay, and I'll second.
All right. Thank you, Jay. I have a motion from Kayla, a second from Jay. Myrna, could you please call the roll?
Cherie Heinzman,
Yes.
Kayla McCord,
Yes.
Tim Haney,
Yes.
Jay Warren,
Ma'am, yes, ma'am.
Doug Noble,
Yes.
so the vote is 5-0.
All right. Thank you very much, Myrna. Okay, I believe I am now handing this back to Travis.
Yes. Okay. So next item is item R. Let's see. 2020-20-FIP, which is Michael's item.
Thank you. 2020-20-FP, consideration and possible action to disapprove for the reasons set forth in the item, an application for a final plat consisting of approximately 58.791 acres of land in the Key West Irrigation Survey, abstract number 711, the I&G and RR Survey, abstract number 774, and the JD John Survey, abstract number 355, generally located north of CR 176 and RR 2243 to be known as Parkside on the River Phase 1A 2020-20- final plat. As previously mentioned, the applicant has requested that we postpone this item 30 days to the next available Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, which would be the April 20th. Currently, we are listing the item as disapproval. The applicant is asking that we postpone to the next P&Z meeting so that they can try to alleviate some of those concerns.
Okay. Thank you. Is the applicant present? And would they like to speak? Okay. Not hearing them. Commissioners, at this time, the public hearing, I don't believe we have anyone signed up to speak. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir. I do not see anybody with their hand up or on the chat box or Q&A session.
Okay, so we could close the public hearing. And at this time, floor is open to a motion.
I move we withdraw it from the agenda as per the request. This is Chris.
I'll second that. Tim Haney.
Okay, so we have a motion by Commissioner Stanley.
If I may, Chairman, so we need the motion to be very specific in stating that it's not to withdraw the request, it's to postpone taking action for a period of up to 30 days.
Yeah, that.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're motion second, so we can, any discussion on this item? Could you please call the roll?
I'm sorry, who made the second?
Commissioner Haney, I believe.
Okay, thank you. Cherie Heinzman,
Yes.
Kayla McCord,
Yes.
Tim Haney,
Yes.
Travis Berthews,
Yes.
Jay Warren,
Yes, ma'am.
Doug Noble,
Yes.
Chris Stanley.
Yes.
Okay. So let's see. So motion carries. It's 7-0. That takes us to our first regularly scheduled legislative item, which is item AR. Let's see. This is 2021-1-REZ, and this is Britain's item.
Yes, good evening, Chair and Commissioners. Britton Bostick. I'm the Downtown and Historic Planner. Y'all don't see me very often, but occasionally I do pop up. So this is a rezoning request for the property at 1004 Church Street. It's lots 1 and 2 of Block 22 in the Glasscock Edition, and the request is to rezone the property from the current residential single-family zoning district to the mixed-use downtown zoning district, which also would rezone the property from the Old Town Historic Overlay Zoning District to the Downtown Historic Overlay Zoning District. And so again, this is for the property at 1004 South Church Street. In the location map, you can see that this is about a quarter of a block on the northeast corner of Block 22 of the Glasscock Edition. If you're orienting yourself, it's very near the downtown. Main Street Baptist Church is directly to the west. And then there's a large city parking lot directly to the north. That parking lot serves as a great way to access the Wilco tax office if you've been there recently or kind of historically. But the property does face on to Church Street. And so going to the aerial map, we can see the property outlined in red, and you can see Main Street Baptist Church is the west half of the block. There is another residential structure directly to the south of the subject property. We've got the city's parking lot to the north, and then various government commercial properties surrounding. This is an area that is in a transition zone. And so commissioners, as I go through the presentation this evening, I want to address this in 2 pieces because there are 2 parts to the rezoning request. One is for the base zoning district, which is requested to be changed from residential single family to the special mixed use downtown zoning that we have only in our downtown. And then the second piece is the change of the overlay districts from Old Town to downtown. And I'll get into that in more detail. You'll also see some historic photos of the property throughout the presentation. But I want to focus on where this property is today. So in our future land use map, this property is designated in the mixed density neighborhood. Mixed density neighborhood is the future land use designation for a large portion of our Old Town Historic Overlay District. The Old Town District not only holds a lot of the historic residences of Georgetown, but It's a special zoning overlay that has review requirements for changes to existing structures, construction of new structures. It's mixed density neighborhood because although we have predominantly single family homes, we also have some other housing types. We have small apartment complexes, and we've also got small commercial centers. So as this is located on the edge of the mixed density neighborhood, some of the uses described in that include small scale neighborhood serving commercial. Special area is a designation that we use for the downtown. This is something that we use in other places in Georgetown, but in the downtown, it's meant to convey there is historic pattern of development that has residential and commercial mixed together and incorporated in ways that you don't necessarily see in other parts of the community. And we have a lot of evolution of land uses in the special area that sometimes have transitioned residential properties to commercial uses while retaining those historic residential structures. But sometimes the historic structures have been removed and made way for new buildings and new uses. So special area is the best way to capture something that's certainly special to me, but that does act a little bit differently than other parts of the city of Georgetown. And so when we look at mixed density neighborhood and what our future land use element lays out for that in our comp plan, this is a variety of housing types. You see dwelling units between 5 and 14 per acre. This could include duplexes, townhomes, quadplexes, kind of that medium or low density multifamily. Compatible housing types can be achieved through development standards. In this case, it's going to be achieved through the application of our certificate of appropriateness requirement for design review and the design guidelines that were adopted for those historic districts. But there is a transition of land uses, and connection to neighborhood serving commercial is part of that. So that could mean neighborhood serving retail, office, institutional, and civic uses. Special area, which is kind of right next door, not the subject property, but very close to it. So I wanted to illustrate here. Special area is a more intense set of uses, focuses more on commercial typically. And so you might have mixed use with high density residential and kind of more intense retail. Your secondary uses are probably medium density residential, office, commercial, recreational, civic uses, et cetera. There's an emphasis on building design and public spaces, and we're looking for a pedestrian orientation. And so when we look at how the property is identified in our future land use map, we're seeing that there is a real, it's in a transition point as it goes from kind of a residential neighborhood oriented kind of set of uses to this more high intensity residential and commercial typically. On the future land use map, the way that that's laid out, we see that this particular subject property is very small in scale. And so as part of that medium density area, the change to the property that's proposed from a residential use to a commercial use is not going to substantially affect the ratio. So what we see in the Old Town Overlay District is that it falls a bit short of the target ratio for commercial for mixed density neighborhoods, but the change of zoning to this property would not substantially impact that number because it is just that quarter of a block. And so as we get into zoning, this is where I can lay out probably a little more successfully the differences between the Old Town Overlay District that the subject property is currently in and the Downtown Overlay District, which is being proposed. And so what the applicant has requested to do is they would like to use the property as a day spa. And so that's a use that would be allowed as categorized as a personal service in the mixed use downtown. It's something that's not currently permitted in the residential single family. And so you can see on this zoning map that the subject property is in that residential single family zoning, that the properties to the east are also zoned residential single family. And that's reflective of the historic residential development patterns that we see as the downtown transitions into the residential areas of Old Town. This property is sharing a block with mixed use downtown zoning as well as residential single family zoning. So it really sits right on that transition between the two. You can see the church property is in that mixed use downtown, and then the subject property and the residential property to the south are still zoned residential. The difference in the overlay districts is something I want to highlight here. So where you are seeing the residential single family zoning in the yellow portion to the right side of that dashed dark black line, that is our Old Town overlay district. Old Town, it was set up to protect historic structures and to help protect the historic character of some of the oldest neighborhoods in Georgetown. And there are a few special zoning considerations for Old Town. Not only do we require design review through the certificate of appropriateness process, and we apply the design guidelines, but there are also some zoning differences. And so setbacks in Old Town are consistent with the setbacks for the base zoning of the property. So if you have a residential single family property in Old Town, the residential single family setbacks will apply. We do limit building height at the setback to 15 feet, which is a little bit different than what you see in our zoning code for other base zoning districts. And then we also have a building height limit of 30 feet in the Old Town overlay district. Signage requires approval of a certificate of appropriateness, even though we do have commercial properties. There is an alternative parking plan available specific to the historic districts, but for the most part, the way that that district is characterized and the way that zoning standards are applied is through kind of reducing the kind of massing of a building on the site and reducing the amount of building compared to the lot size. There's also a floor to area ratio limit of 0.45 in the Old Town overlay district. Now, contrast that with the downtown overlay district, which this property is proposed to be included in. The applicant did request the mixed use downtown zoning for the base zoning. According to our Unified Development Code, any property that has the mixed use downtown zoning also needs to have the downtown overlay zoning. And so that's why that's proposed to change as well. The downtown overlay, as I kind of go through the slides, we expect to not have setbacks with this zoning category in the downtown. The downtown has a different building height limit. It's 40 feet, so it's taller. There is a higher amount of impervious cover allowed. And so in a lot of cases, it's 70%, but you can actually go up to 90%. So you're looking at a lot more lot coverage in the downtown than you would probably see in the Old Town overlay. And then if there is an adjacency to a residential zone property, then there's a 10-foot landscape buffer requirement. But the mixed use downtown is really specific to our downtown overlay district, and then being included in that downtown overlay basically sets you up for larger scale buildings and buildings that are more adapted to commercial uses and commercial intensities. And so there's a parking kind of requirement that is a little bit different for downtown. The parking ratios, if you're in the 9 blocks around the square, there is no parking minimum. And then if you are in anywhere else in the downtown, and so if this property were rezoned, it would be falling into this. The parking ratio is 1 space per 500 square feet of building area. It's a little bit lower than you might see for the office zoning, for example, but we still have those parking minimums just kind of reduced in the downtown. And so the uses that are permitted by right, I mentioned that the applicant is requesting this rezoning in order to be able to use the subject property as a day spa facility, but it would also allow for an inn, restaurants, catering services, medical or dental office, artisan studio or gallery, the personal services that I spoke about, laundromat, banking and financial services, emergency services station, library, museum, park and ride facility, utility services, minor, etc. Permitted with limitations would be bed and breakfast, general office, general retail, upper story residential, home-based business, religious assembly facilities, even a heliport, if you can imagine it. And then permitted with an SUP would be boutique hotel or full service hotel, a bar, tavern or pub, a theater. Event facilities would require a special use permit. Medical or dental clinic, which is kind of more practitioners than the office, would be allowed with an SUP, and then also fitness centers, townhomes, assisted living, some other residential types. And so there are some kind of measures in place that they're some uses permitted by right, but a lot of the uses would require an SUP. And so that covers the zoning portion from the change from residential single family to mixed use downtown. But I do want to share also, commissioners, because this property is proposed to be included in the downtown overlay district, there's a second part to the zoning consideration. And this is a part that comes with a lot more pictures, which is very fun for me to share with you this property history. And so we have the rezoning approval criteria, which I'll cover as I complete the historic portion. But the reason I'm sharing these with you, you don't often see them, is the inclusion in the downtown overlay district has a special set of approval criteria as well. And so this property is very kind of well connected to notable Georgetownians. David Love, you might be familiar with the David Love building on the square. This was his home. And so David Love built this house around 1867. We don't see it until it appears on the 1900 Sanborn fire insurance map. And what we can see from a series of maps is that this house changed its shape over time. And so what was kind of interesting and exciting to me is to realize this house went from what would have been probably a folk Victorian style, which would have been kind of the end of Georgetown in the Wild West, to a much more refined style. A lot of decorative elements were added. The house changed footprint. And so when the Love family sold the property shortly after the turn of the 20th century, it was owned by one family, and then they sold it to the Daniel family. Laura Daniel was a widow. She ran the Georgetown Telephone Company, and then her daughter, Jessie Daniel Ames, who was also an owner of the house. And the changes that you can see between the map on the left and the map on the right are attributed to the Daniel Ames families. Jessie Daniel Ames was a noted civic activist. She is very famous in Texas for being a suffragette and voting rights advocate for women. She was the first president of the Texas League of Women Voters. And then once women's suffrage was passed, she went on to be an advocate for civil rights. And she was a strong leader in the anti-lynching movement in the American South. And so her association with Georgetown, she not only lived here and worked here and began her civic activism career here, but she was also a graduate of Southwestern University. And so the earliest photo that I was able to find of the house is from 1934. This is about the time that Jessie Daniel Ames was selling the property and moving to other parts of Texas to continue her work. And so we see the house here right behind Main Street Baptist Church. And what we can see through the series of maps and the series of photos is that although the house has changed quite a bit over time, it does retain a substantial amount of historic character. It's able to be identified as a historic home and really adds to the character of the street along Church Street, and then there along 10th Street as well. And so we have photos from 1984 as we move forward in time. And something that I think worth noting, commissioners, sometimes it's hard to understand the history of changes to a house over time unless you have the photos. And so I would encourage you to look and see there is no balcony and no kind of second floor porch visible in the 1984 photos, but we do see those on the house today. And so sometime after 1984, these second floor porches and balconies were added to this structure. Just a little bit of history for you there. So these are the current photos of the house. It is a 2-story residential structure, and there's a non-historic detached garage also on the property. And so when staff reviewed the application with the rezoning criteria, we found that the application was complete and the information was sufficient and correct enough to allow for review and action. We found that the zoning change was partially consistent with the comprehensive plan. And the reason for that, commissioners, is that this is in a transition zone, which does allow for a neighborhood serving commercial. The rezoning of the property would not kind of be a harm or threat to the historic integrity of the structure, because we do have measures in place, the certificate of appropriateness process, to do design review and look at any additions or changes to the structure's exterior that might be proposed. We don't review changes to the interior of a historic structure as part of that process. That's just part of a regular building permit. And so what we did find that inclusion in the downtown overlay district, because the zoning standards are different for building height and for setbacks, that would create the opportunity for this property to take on kind of a built form or a building envelope in the future that might be very different from the residential streetscape that's currently there along Church Street. And it would be different from the historic development patterns. And so that's why we found that to be a partially complies. We did find that the proposed zoning change promotes the health, safety, or general welfare and the safe, healthful development of the city. The proposed zoning change would still be kind of a consistent transition of uses and zoning. And because it would be located across Church Street from other single family residential, there is a buffer to those properties to the east. But when we got to the fourth criteria, that it's compatible with the present zoning and conforming uses of nearby property and character of the neighborhood, that was another that staff found partially complies. And a lot of that has to do with the historic character of the neighborhood and the way that the downtown and Old Town have kind of shifted over time. So if you're not familiar with Georgetown's development history specific to the downtown, the area that this house is in used to be primarily residential homes, single family residential structures. Sometimes there were borders, sometimes large families, sometimes smaller families. But as time has evolved and the downtown has grown, more and more of those residential structures were either repurposed for commercial or they were demolished and made way for either parking lots or commercial structures. So this is a property that has more associations with residential neighborhood than commercial does. And so that's why we found that it partially complies. And then finally, that the property to be rezoned is suitable for uses permitted by the district. We found that you could indeed kind of use this property successfully as a commercial property, with one kind of note, and that point being, if this property were to convert to a commercial zoning and a commercial use, the property would need to provide on-site parking in accordance with our UDC requirements. I mentioned that one space per 500 square foot ratio. And so on this property, that might be a bit of a challenge just from a site development standpoint. And so there was not enough, in staff's evaluation, there was not kind of the same amount of available area for parking that one might find on a larger lot, for example, or with a building with a different location on the site. And so that's where we found there might be a potential challenge in the suitability. I'm going to go to the second set of criteria, and this is for the downtown overlay zoning. And so in this case, rather than 5 applicable criteria to evaluate, the UDC lays out that the city council needs to find that only one of the criteria apply to this property or comply. And so we have 5 criteria, but we're only looking for 1 in this instance. And staff's finding was that this complied with 3 of those 5. And so the structure does have interest or value because of its unique role in the development, heritage, or characteristics. This is a house that's one of the oldest in Georgetown, built in 1867. And the fact that it's come with us for so long, it really kind of displays the evolution of building design and construction over time. And it's one of the oldest remaining structures that we've been able to identify. We're not aware that there was a notable historical event at the site. The site is identifiable with both the David Love family and with the Daniel Ames family, both of those notable in Georgetown's history. The Love family was also really well known for their business leadership, ranching in Williamson County. David Love is one of the signers of the petition to separate Williamson County from Milam County and was basically one of the creators of our county. So that's very notable. And then Jesse Daniel Ames, of course, was a very well-known suffragette and civil rights activist, but her mother ran the Georgetown Telephone Company at that period of time after she was widowed. And so that's fairly significant as well. The structure does embody very specific and identifiable architectural characteristics. I mentioned that it's evolved over time, and that evolution is really kind of still beautifully captured in the building that we can see today and in the photographs, as it evolved from what would have been a folk Victorian house with a lot more simple construction to a larger footprint house that looks more like a little bit more like a Queen Anne Victorian with a little bit later influences. And so this is really a remarkable residence and glad to have it under historic district protections. We don't expect that there would be any archaeological value available to us through the site. And so we found that that did not comply. In accordance with our UDC requirements, 21 property owners were notified within the notification buffer. We posted notice in the Sun News on March 21st, and signs were posted on the property. To date, staff has received no comments in favor and 2 comments opposed. Those comments were included in the agenda packet. The Historic and Architectural Review Commission has already reviewed this application in their meeting on March 25th and recommended approval of the request, 3 votes to 1. I will note, commissioners, that when the Historic and Architectural Review Commission, or HARC as we call them, heard this application, they were only considering the change from the Old Town Overlay District to the Downtown Overlay District. HARC does not review base zoning districts or uses. They look at historic zoning overlays, historic landmarks, and certificates of appropriateness. And so that concludes my presentation, commissioners. And just as a reminder, this is a public hearing that we'll be holding and possible action. So this is for the property lots 1 and 2, block 22, the Glasscock addition at 1004 South Church Street. I'm happy to answer any questions the commissioners might have, and I believe the applicant is present in the meeting.
Okay, everybody hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, right as she was finishing up, my computer was froze again, but looks like we're back. Okay, commissioners, do you have any questions for Britton?
Yeah, Britton, this is Commissioner Heinzman. Can you explain again the parking? So the applicant is wanting to turn this very historic home into a day spa. But I don't see where the parking has been addressed. Are they going to park on the street in the neighborhood, or what's the assumption here?
Thank you so much. And so that remains a question. And so in the rezoning request, it is a straight rezoning and not a special use permit. And so the applicant did provide some kind of drawings or images showing what they're proposing, which would essentially be at this point in time to have the parking spaces located approximately where you see here in the photos and back onto the street. What we would need to do as part of this process, which would follow a rezoning if approved, is the creation of that parking would go through the site development plan process, and staff would work out the technical details of that parking with the applicant or with the property owner. So based on our criteria for on-site parking and what the UDC requires around parking, I would not say that we have that fully resolved yet. There's certainly an opportunity to resolve it in the future, but as you can see, the house and the existing garage are relatively close to the the property line. And so when staff looked at what the opportunity is to provide that on-site parking, that would be part of the requirement with the commercial zoning. That was one of the challenges that we see that would still need to be addressed through the site development process.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, so are you saying, does their street parking, does that count? Or is there on-site parking?
The on-site parking currently would kind of be limited to what the garage might be able to provide. My understanding is that they would propose to use that structure not for parking, but as part of their facility. And so there are some options available to the applicant. We do have an alternative parking plan that allows for basically counting developed on-street parking that meets the city's standards and requirements. They would be able to request approval to basically assign that parking as part of meeting their parking requirement. So the developed kind of parallel parking that you see here is potentially able to be counted. It looks like based on the square footage, they would need to provide between 7 and 9 parking spaces total. And so this could potentially satisfy part of that requirement. Although there would probably need to be more spaces accounted for total.
Okay, Britton, I'm sorry, this is Commissioner Heinzman again. I'm very familiar with this area and I'm very familiar how narrow those streets are. So you're saying the applicant or they're proposing that they can, I guess, create 6 to 8 parking spaces on that street?
If the commissioners wouldn't mind, I have kind of a sketch provided by the applicant between the time the agenda was posted and this meeting. And so I'd be happy to show what they are potentially proposing if the commission would like.
Sure, that's fine with me. You can show that. And then I see that the applicant's on here, but we'll get through questions for staff and then we'll hear from him.
All right, so I am sharing an image of the site design showing a proposed parking layout. We would still need to work through the parking layout, I think, because our UDC currently kind of limits backing directly into the right-of-way from on-site parking or off-street parking. And so this is what the applicant's latest design shows. And we would still expect to go through the site development plan review process in order to kind of finalize those details. Again, if the rezoning requests were approved.
Okay, well, I have a similar question that and partially relates to that. So my understanding, mixed use downtown impervious cover.
I'm sorry, Chair, your audio froze for us a moment there. Could you please repeat?
Can y'all hear me?
I can now, yes, sir.
So mixed use downtown is one of the most intense uses we have, correct?
I think C3 would probably be more intense than the downtown.
Okay, but it's close to 100% impervious cover, is that correct?
Yes, sir. And so the way the water quality detention ponds were set up, a property can achieve up to 90% impervious cover in mixed use downtown, which is generally not available in other zoning districts.
Right, so in theory, based on the property size they have, based on what I'm seeing, they would have the ability to create parking lots of places, being able to build out that site. Is that correct?
Potentially. One of the things that we would look at is driveway locations. So from an impervious cover standpoint, they probably would have a lot of opportunity. Some of the constraints could be locations of driveways and also drive aisle and parking space dimensions.
Gotcha. So my question, I don't know if Commissioner Heinzman, are you satisfied with your answer there?
I'm fine, thank you.
So my question is what the reason for mixed use downtown is. So you've got a historic property. It doesn't appear to want to be constructing a lot of other things on the site. Why that zoning?
It's use-based, and so the mixed-use downtown would allow a retail use, it would allow the personal services use, and also the mixed-use downtown parking ratio is a lower ratio than an office use by itself or kind of a personal services use by itself. So where you might see parking ratios of 1 space per 300 or 400 square feet, mixed use downtown offers a lower ratio of 1 per 500 square feet. I believe that played a role in the applicant's request.
Okay. And would they be able to operate what their, I guess I didn't think to look, but would they be able to operate what they're proposing to operate within, say, the office zoning district?
I believe so, yes. I believe that does allow for the personal services use category, which is what a day spa would be.
Okay, makes sense. Okay, do any other commissioners have questions for staff?
This is Kayla McCord. I do. I have a couple of questions for Britton. First of all, any non-residential use, if this request is approved, any non-residential use that is proposed would require that they meet the parking space requirements to operate at all. Is that correct?
That's correct. And so what is really kind of unique about the mixed use downtown is this property would be able to continue as a single family residence in that zoning district change. And so mixed use downtown does allow single family. But when a use changes and commercial property requires a certificate of appropriateness, we look at what would be needed to kind of bring the property into conformance with those certificate of occupancy. We look at certificate of occupancy requirements. And so because this would be a new use, it would have to meet the use requirements. One of those would be parking. And so we would look at the proposed use and what the parking ratio is. In this case, almost every use that would be proposed and allowed in the zoning district would be that 1 per 500 ratio. And then we go through whatever process might be needed to get the property updated to meet that standard. In this case, it would be the site development plan process. And you might see kind of other needs as other types of properties kind of come into conformance. We have a lot of residential properties that have converted to commercial uses. And a lot of times the parking areas are tucked behind those residential properties. And so that's kind of an example of needing to bring it up to speed, if you will, for a commercial use. So that would be required. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, commissioners, any other questions?
I'm sorry. I was muted and didn't realize it. But that leads to my other question, which is, even though the downtown, the change of the historic overlay districts would allow things to be done differently on the property, other than uses, as far as setbacks and things like that. But regardless, to what extent is the design review or the certificate of appropriateness requirements, to what extent do those protect this structure as it is today?
That's a great question. Thank you, Commissioner. So the protections would be the same, whether a property is in the downtown overlay district or in the Old Town overlay district. The same review requirements apply. And even though you would be allowed up to 40 feet in the downtown overlay, that doesn't necessarily mean that your project could kind of max out that limit, because one of the things that is considered, and this is part of what the Historic and Architectural Review Commission does, one of the things that would be considered is how compatible would those changes be to the existing historic structure and what remains of that historic fabric. So I don't believe that a change from Old Town to downtown would have much effect on the property because of the design standards that are applying now and would continue to apply, and the application process that is applying now and would continue to apply. Where the difference really would be is if a future development were available in the future. So one of the things we look at with zoning is a particular use might be proposed or a particular structure might be proposed, but what could be in the future? If there were any future development of this property, and that's not proposed at this time, I want to be clear, the applicant's not proposing any of those changes at this time. But let's say for some reason the house were not able to survive past the year 2300, and the site were developed with the mixed use downtown zoning and the downtown overlay, then a building would have those new constraints on it rather than being treated more like the residential property that it is today. And so it's more kind of viewing future development and what those limitations would be versus kind of the design considerations. I hope I didn't get that too confusing, but really we have a lot of design review requirements that already apply and would continue to apply to this structure that are outside of the maximums allowed by the zoning districts.
Okay, and last thing, and I don't mean to take up a bunch of time. So if there's some protection for this historic structure, and if a commercial use of any kind fails to be able to meet the parking requirements, whether it's alternative or anything else, then this structure could still be used as under the new zoning, if it's approved, as a residence. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am, that's completely correct.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, commissioners, any other questions for staff on this item? Okay, it appears the applicant is present and would like to speak. I see. If the applicant would please state your name, address for the record.
My name is Richard Ryan. Were you able to hear me?
Yes, state your name and address, and then you'll have to speak.
So my name is Richard Ryan, and I'm the owner of 1004 Church Street. My permanent address is 1371 Oak Lawn Drive, New Braunfels, Texas 78132. Just to give you a little bit of perspective, I own a spa that's currently on the square on 7th Street, right across from the courthouse. Due to some of the changes that are going on there, we're not going to be able to continue to exist in that building. Our landlord has not extended any leases, and we're being forced to find a new place. I became very attracted to this home when I first saw a sign go up in front of it. It has an amazing heritage. And the brand that my company has is a 50-year-old one in Austin. Helena is the name. She was one of the first skincare people who came to Austin, and she actually used to do Ladybird's skincare back in the 1970s. So the fact that there is a tribute to strong women heritage with Miss Jessie Ames, I think fits in very well with what we do. So when you look at the mixed use aspect and say, well, you can go up to 90% impervious cover, that is not at all what my interest is in doing with the property. You know, we're used to working right now where we only have clients who can get whatever street parking is available. And we certainly believe there's an opportunity to comply with whatever the amount of parking is that's recommended. On the other hand, the more parking you put on this beautiful piece of property is going to change the historic heritage of the property. So that's why we like the mixed use heritage or mixed use zoning component better than anything else. It also provides, you know, if, for instance, if day spas don't work out in another pandemic, because it's been a tough year, it makes great office space, or could also be residential again as well. So essentially what I am interested in doing is taking the heritage, and Britton's been fantastic at uncovering a lot of history here outside of what I already had, and refurbing the location and making the story more well known than it already is.
Okay, thank you. Commissioners, do you have any questions for the applicant? Okay, I have a question. So explain to me, I think I asked Britton this, and so what is the reasoning for the application being mixed use downtown versus some other zoning?
The mixed use downtown versus the office downtown would allow us to hold on to the garden area of the facility. So obviously, the more parking per square foot you need, I will have to chop into the landscape that's provided there. As we build a destination day spa, I envision gardens and things that are much more attractive than asphalt.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner, any other commissioners have questions for the applicant? Okay, not hearing any. We can open the public hearing.
Chair, at the moment, I do not see any hands raised or a name in the chat of anybody that'd like to speak. At the moment, we do have a number of attendees, but I do not see them unmuting themselves at the moment.
Okay. Well, then we. Can everybody hear me? Yes, no?
Yes, we can now.
Okay. Floor is open to a motion.
Kayla McCord, move to approve the requested rezoning.
Chris
Or
Stanley, second.
recommend approval. Sorry.
So we have a recommendation of approval by Commissioner McCord. Second, Commissioner Stanley. Okay. Any discussion on this item?
So Travis, this is Sheree. So what I'm understanding is the applicant is still trying to figure out the parking situation. Correct?
That's how I understand it, along with
Okay.
some other items, but yes.
Okay.
But
Thank you.
by moving to a much higher intensity zoning, their parking situation is less to figure out, is how I understand it.
Well, and what I heard, and you guys can tell me if I'm wrong, but I heard they've still got the issue of backing into a right of way. And those parallel parking lot, the parking spaces along the front belong to the city, not to the homeowner, although that some of that will be credited towards parking, but it doesn't get him there.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, there's still some, if I understood our presenter correctly, there's still a fair amount of work that's got to go through on parking, but we're not to that stage yet. And it's going to require additional approval by the city. And Commissioner, I can't tell whether you're frozen or you just look, oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, I'm here. I was looking at the map, sorry. But yes, I mean I agree with you. Okay. So any other discussion? Otherwise, Marty, please call the roll.
Sheree Heinzman,
No.
Kayla McCord,
Yes.
Tim Haney,
Yes.
Travis Berthews,
No.
Jay Warren,
No.
Doug Noble,
Yes.
Chris Stanley,
Yes.
So I have 4 votes in favor, 3 votes opposed. But we're moving on. Let's see, so the next item is item AS. This is file number 2020-22-REZ, and this is Michael, is that correct?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Looking at our first item to 2021-2 REZ. Public hearing and possible action on a request for a zoning map amendment to rezone approximately 0.141 acres out of the Nicholas Porter Survey, abstract number 497, from the Townhouse Zoning District to the Residential Single Family Zoning District for the property generally located at 206 East Janus Drive, 2021-2 REZ. Okay, sorry, give me 1 second here. I'm having a bit of an audio issue. Okay, are you able to hear me all right? No?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the subject property is located at 206 East Janus Drive. This property is part of a 3-acre site, and we are looking at a 0.114 portion of it. This property may look familiar as it was rezoned back in October 2018 from residential single family to the townhouse zoning district. Subject property is located in between Janus Drive and Reverie Boulevard. We are just about 500 feet north of Park Lane, and we are right behind the Cedar Ridge apartment complex. Looking here at the future land use designation, you can see that the subject property and all the property around it is within the special area. That is because this is part of the Williams Drive Gateway Plan. And this particular site, as you can see right here, this little light brown color that stretches out, is the high density mixed housing. The primary use is medium density residential, such as townhomes, apartments, or assisted living facilities. It has the no fewer than 16 dwelling units per acre and a target ratio of 80% residential and 20% residential. Looking here at the zoning map, you can see that the subject property is directly adjacent to residential single family to the west and to the north across East Janus Drive. As I mentioned previously, the remaining portion of the 3-acre site is within the townhome zoning district, and to the east, there is high density multifamily. Looking at the proposed zoning district is the residential single family, which is medium density with a minimum lot size of 5,500 square feet. Generally within this area permitted by right, you're going to see the single family detached. There is also a couple of uses that may be permitted with certain limitations, as well as a short list here that may be permitted after the approval of a special use permit. Looking at the criteria for a rezoning, staff found that 4 out of the 5 criteria complies and 1 partially complies, which I will go over with you right now. To begin, the application was deemed to be complete. Number 2, the zoning change being consistent with the comprehensive plan. As I mentioned, the subject property has the specific designation of high density mixed housing, intended to provide no fewer than 16 dwelling units per acre. And as examples of uses, common uses would be the apartments, townhomes, and assisted living facilities. In this regard, the proposed zoning district is not appropriate. However, the subject, as mentioned, the subject property is part of a 3-acre property. The subject may be considered the 0.14 panhandle of the larger tract. So this panhandle area is just under 50 feet wide and is adjacent both to the east and to the west with the medium density mixed housing. The medium density mixed housing permits the use of single family detached homes. Therefore, the requested residential single family zoning district for this small portion of the 3-acre tract may be appropriate considering the adjacent future land uses of the surrounding neighbors. Looking at number 3, the proposed zoning will not negatively affect the health, safety, or general welfare of the city. The applicant's letter of intent states that they intend to develop 1 single family detached residential structure as indicated with the submitted preliminary plats, posing minimal impact on the surrounding neighborhood. For the last two criteria, the zoning change is compatible with the present zoning conforming uses, and the property to be rezoned is suitable for the uses permitted by the district. Staff found that both of these complies as well. The subject property is located along East Janus Drive with the residential detached and attached homes to the east and the west, while the adjacent single-family development to the east here is the MF2 along Westwood Lane and Ryan Lane, zoned for the MF2 zoning. The entire property has developed with single-family development, thus displaying that the proposed zoning will be compatible with the present land use and the character of the neighborhood. Furthermore, the proposed zoning district has the minimum lot size of the 5,500 square feet. The subject property is at 6,160 square feet. Therefore, the property to be rezoned is suitable for the uses permitted within the RS zoning district. Here we go. Within 300 feet, 28 property owners were contacted. Notice was placed in the Sun newspaper on March 21st, and signs were posted on the property. At the time that I submitted this application, we did not have any written comments, but since then we did receive 2 written comments in opposition, which I believe were emailed to all the members of the Planning and Zoning Commission. So in summary, per the UDC, the Planning and Zoning Commission shall hold a public hearing and make recommendation to the City Council. Staff is here to answer any questions you may have. The applicant is also with us this evening. They do not have a presentation to make, but they are here to answer any questions that you may have. And with that, I will turn back over to you, Mr. Commissioner.
Okay, thank you. Commissioners, any questions for staff on this item?
Travis, this is Tim Haney. I have to abstain from voting on this item.
Yes, sir. We've got it. But thank you for checking. But yes, we are aware of that. But we shouldn't need anyone else. We should still have a quorum. Okay, so if there's no questions for staff, if the applicant is present and does not wish to speak, commissioners, do you have any questions for the applicant on this item? Okay, not hearing any.
Unmuted.
No, Lord.
We can open the public hearing. Let's see. Do we have anyone signed up to speak on this item?
We have 2 hands raised. First would be Stephanie B. And the second after Stephanie would be Claudia McAnts.
Okay, well, we'll go with Stephanie first. So if you could state your full name and address, you will have 3 minutes to speak on this item.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, yes. My name is Stephanie Bauer and I live at 1608 Westwood Lane, which is Georgetown, Texas, which is right behind the property that is in question. And my husband wrote, I don't know if you read it or not, his explanation of why we would prefer it not to be zoned for a house. And if there's any way we could buy it, all 4 people on this street, it concerns 3 homes. And then there's a 4th one that wants to know if there's any way we could buy that, purchase that so that we could, I don't know how we would be able to rezone it ourselves or what, for our own properties, because it's a very small area. It's not large, and he wanted to put a house there, rezone it for a house. So we were trying to figure out if there's any way around that.
Just so we're clear, we are not here to answer questions on the item. we glad to let you speak and
Okay,
discuss that, but we're not in a position to answer those questions.
okay. Well, that was all that I wanted to mention.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we have Claudia. If you would like to state your full name and address, you will have 3 minutes to speak on this item as well.
Hi, hopefully y'all can hear me. My name is actually Laura Hobgood. I'm at Claudia's house because we're neighbors on one of the 4 properties, and we're vaccinated, so we're allowed to be inside together. But my property backs up. It's 1614 Westwood Lane. And from our perspective, and I have spoken with Mr. Haney already. Thank you, Mr. Haney. I didn't realize when we were speaking, they're actually on the Planning and Zoning Commission. I've been on the faculty at Southwestern University for 22 years and purchased this property about 6 years ago. And we're hoping to maybe delay or postpone the rezoning until we can have further conversation with Mr. Haney about the possibility of doing a new survey, a survey that would extend along all 4 of our properties that backs up to that land, so that the 4 of us could form an LLC and possibly negotiate with him to purchase that piece of property. And then eventually, but with just the 2 weeks notice that this was happening, we hadn't had time to do that, though Mr. Haney and I have had a very pleasant conversation. And so I'm hoping that maybe we can wait on the rezoning until we can speak with him about a new survey that changes the dimensions and the extent of that piece of property.
Okay, thank you. Do we have anyone else signed up to speak on that item?
No, sir, I do not see any additional hands raised or names in the chat.
Okay, then we will close the public hearing at this time, and the floor is open to a motion.
Jay, I move we approve.
So we have a recommendation for approval from Commissioner Warren
Stanley, I second.
and a second by Commissioner Stanley. Any discussion on this item? Okay,
Yeah,
Merle,
Travis, this is Sheree. Is the owner of the property, are they present? Are they?
they are, and it appears that they do not wish to comment on those questions.
All right, they do not wish to comment or entertain any of the residents' questions. Okay. All right, thank you.
This is Kayla McCord. I have one question for staff. Should the adjacent property owners have an interest in acquiring that property, that would be something they would need to pursue with the owner of the property and request a rezoning on their own. Should that process move forward? Would that be correct?
Yes, that would be between the neighbors and the applicant. If that were the case that they wanted to pursue with, eventually they would just withdraw this application, and then the neighbors, once they had ownership of the property, they would come back with a new rezoning case.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion on this item? Any other discussion on this item before we call the roll? Okay, Merle, please call the roll on this item.
Sheree Heinzman,
Yes.
Kayla McCord,
Yes.
Travis Perthews, Travis?
Yes, can you hear me? Sorry, yes.
Okay. Jay Warren,
Ma'am, yes, ma'am.
Doug Noble,
Yes.
Chris Stanley.
Yes.
Okay, so that motion passes. Let's see. So we got with Commissioner Haney abstaining. Okay. Next item, it's item BN, and I believe this is also Michael. Let's see, this is 2020-4-PU.
Yes, sir. Give me just 1 second to set this up. Okay, can you see the new project?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, 2024 PUD, public hearing and possible action on a request for a zoning map amendment to rezone a 146.786 acre tract of land out of the Woodruff Stubblefield survey, abstract number 556, from agriculture to plan unit development with a base district of residential single family, low density multifamily, and general commercial for the property generally located northeast of the Sam Houston Avenue and Belgian Road intersection, project 2024 PUD. Okay, so tonight's plan unit development request is for a 146 acre property located north of Sam Houston Avenue. This is in between Belgian Road and Patriot Way. The subject property is in the southeastern portion of Georgetown. We are roughly 500 feet south of State Highway 130, and we are to the south and to the east of the Saddle Creek plan unit development. As you can see in this future land use map, there are two predominant future land use categories, both the regional center, which is this darker red color here, and the community center, which is this lighter pink color. Within the regional center of the 146 acres, there's roughly 104 acres, which put about 71%, meaning that the community center would have around 42 acres inside. We're going to look at the community center first and then the regional center. So looking at the community center, the primary use is small to mid-sized retailers located around arterial roads and intersections. The targeted dwelling unit and acre for this area is for 14 or more. And then looking at the target ratio of the area, we are looking to achieve 20% residential and 80% non-residential. Currently, as a large portion of Sam Houston Avenue, particularly at the Sam Houston Avenue Belgian intersection, is currently undeveloped. You can see that 86% is currently left unentitled. Now looking at the regional center, the larger swath on the eastern portion, the primary use of this future land use category is large retailers. These are generally located along arterial roads and highways. We have a target dwelling unit and acre of 18 or more. And then we have the target ratio of 75% non-residential, 25% residential. Very similar to the community center. Currently, a large portion of this, particularly the land along State Highway 130 and the eastern portion of Sam Houston, is currently undeveloped. So that's why we have such a large swath there. Looking at the zoning, the current zoning of the property, you can see that the property is zoned AG, which is agriculture. So is the property to the north, to the east, and to the south. And then, as we mentioned earlier, we are adjacent to the Saddle Creek plan unit development, which has 4 neighboring different zoning districts. We have the C1, which is the local commercial, RS, residential single family, MF, the low density, and then the BP, which is the business park. Here. So what is being proposed tonight is a plan unit development. This is a special proposed zoning district. It allows a little bit of flexibility, both with planning and design, and it can accommodate multiple uses. The proposed plan unit development, the Lawhon PUD, offers 3 different base zoning districts. We have the commercial C3 that goes along Sam Houston and Patriot Way. This is 68.9 acres in size. And then moving into the low density multifamily, which is 26.1 acres. And then moving back to the residential single family portion, which is 51.8 acres in size. I'm going to address each one in order, and we're going to go residential, multifamily, and then the C3 development. So beginning with the residential single family, this is generally what you're going to see in this area is the single family detached homes. While there are a small list here of uses that may be permitted with certain limitations, as well as a third list of uses that may be permitted after the approval of a special use permit. All of these are to UDC standards. For each category, we broke them down by a few select items. We then have the what the PUD is proposing, followed by the UDC standard, and last the change that we're going to have. So as we can see, begin with is the lot width. While the UDC requires 45-foot lot width for residential, the applicant is proposing 47. Furthermore, the PUD does state that a minimum of 40% of the lots will be over 50 feet in width. So at a minimum, we will be at least 2 feet larger with the lot width. We will be an additional foot longer with the corner lot width as well. And then we move into the front setbacks, where we can see that the PUD is selecting to have the front setbacks for both the house and the garage 5 feet closer than what the standard UDC would have. Additionally, the garage access from the side of the property is also going to be 5 feet shorter. And the last point that seems different from the UDC here from these select items is the impervious cover. The UDC is currently at 45% for residential single family, while the applicant is proposing 52 with the addition of a waiver, which would be 7% higher. Looking at the MF1, these are generally going to be your multifamily attached and detached houses, although, again, there are a few uses that may be permitted with limitations. And then again, a short list of uses that would be permitted after a special use permit has been approved. Looking at a few changes here, major one is the front setback. The UDC standard is 20 feet, while the PUD proposes 10 feet. That would be 10 feet closer to the roadway that the multifamily structure would be allowed to be. And furthermore, the UDC standard for impervious cover is 50%, and the applicant is proposing 65 after the acceptance of a waiver, which would be 15% higher. And then lastly, looking at the general commercial, the C3 development, that was the portion along Sam Houston Avenue and Patriot Way. We see a larger amount of uses that may be permitted by rights, and again with the limitations, and then a third list with the special use permits. But as you will see, there are several uses that have been highlighted that the applicant has elected through the PUD will not be permitted within the C3 zoning district. Some of these include parking lots, small engine repair, kennel, pest control, and bus barn. Oops. In addition to the uses allowed within C3, per the PUD, office uses as identified within the UDC shall also be permitted within the C3 zoning district. So some of the changes here between the PUD and the UDC, we can see again, we are 5 feet shorter with that front and street setback requirements. However, with the C3, you will see that they are proposing to have an additional 10 feet for their rear setback requirement. The UDC standard in the PUD is the same for building maximum height within the C3 development of 60 feet. However, the PUD does state that if a structure is located within 100 feet of a residentially zoned area, that structure will have a height limitation of 35 feet. And lastly, the UDC standard is 70%, and the PUD is requesting 77 with a waiver. That would be a change of 7%. Whoops, excuse me. Looking at the approval criteria, to begin with, there is a rezoning portion, and then there's a plan unit development portion. So beginning with the rezoning criteria, number one, the application is complete. Number two, the zoning change being consistent with the comprehensive plan. The subject property is located, as we mentioned, within 2 future land use designation, community center and regional center. To begin with, the C3 development located along Sam Houston and Patriot Way does appear to be providing commercial, so that would be in line. We're first going to look at the community center portion. This is an estimated 42 acres of the subject property is located within the community center node. The entire node is estimated to be 305 acres in size. As we mentioned earlier, the goal is to be at 80% non-residential development, 20% residential development. However, with the proposal, as long with other developments in the area, we are looking at the approval of this PUD would flip that ratio, and we would be at the 80% residential and 20% non-residential. Moving into the regional center, which is in this red area here. This is an estimated 104 acres within the subject property is located within the regional center. And this entire area that we depicted is 374 acres in size. The regional center node has a target ratio of 75% non-residential, 25% residential. If approved, you can see here that would bring the target ratio to 25%, and we would be capped. While that is not going against the comprehensive plan because it is within the means, that would result in any future residential portion of the regional center area being generally in conflict with the 2030 comprehensive plan, being we are already at the residential capacity. The community center and regional center future land use designation allow for 20 and 25% residential development. Both of these future land use categories specifically encourage high density residential. This is typically going to be your multifamily with a maximum density of 24 units an acre. 51.8 acres of the proposed PUD displays residential single family with a maximum build out of 210 units, averaging out around at 4 dwelling units an acre. Furthermore, the portion proposed for the MF1 is intended to be developed with detached multifamily units that are more in line with the size, scale, and density typically seen in a residential subdivision. That would be developed at a density between 10 and 14 dwelling units an acre. Therefore, roughly 52% of the subject property is proposing a land use that is either not permitted or is not in line with the future land use target ratios. Moving on to the health, safety, and general welfare. Okay, the PUD promotes commercial development along the high-intensity roadway to the south, Sam Houston, with residential uses interior to the project as we move away from the Sam Houston Freeway. That displays that the PUD promotes an overall orderly development within the subject property. Furthermore, both direct accesses to the residential single-family portion come from the major collectors Lawhon Lane and Belgian Road. This will assist in providing less intense roadways for travelers coming off of Freeway Sam Houston and Patriot Way. However, there are a few areas of the PUD that do not display an orderly transition. You can see in this northern portion here, there is C3 development being directly adjacent to the residential single-family zoning district, which provides no distinguishable transition in intensities. Furthermore, the residentially zoning district is directly adjacent to a portion of Saddle Creek PUD with the base zoning district of Business Park. Generally, it's considered a good planning practice to have a gradual transition of uses as you move away from major roadways. In this case, the portion of a subject property would be going from high intensity commercial to low intensity residential back to moderate density business office type uses. There's also quite a shift in the intensity for this area with the commercial zoning district intended to be 18 or more dwelling units an acre, being directly adjacent to, as we mentioned before, what is going to be estimated at 4 dwelling units an acre. That shift in intensity does not provide the safe, orderly development of the area. Number 4, the zoning change is compatible with the present zoning and conforming uses of the nearby property. The proposed commercial development with the subject is compatible with the high intensity of Sam Houston Avenue, as well as the entitled multifamily across Belgian Road. Furthermore, the residential portion of the PUD is compatible with the adjacent residential portion of the Saddle Creek development. The proposed PUD, however, is not compatible with the non-residential entitled portion of Saddle Creek development. This portion is entitled for the business park, as we mentioned, which permits more intense commercial and light industrial uses, including manufacturing, assembly, and general processing. The proposed single-family residential is therefore not compatible with the adjacent intense business or industrial uses that would be permitted by this business park. Lastly, there is sufficient area within all 3 zoning districts to develop the subject properties with any of the uses permitted while being in compliance with the UDC and the plan unit development. So as I mentioned, we have the criteria for the rezoning, and now we're going to move into the specific criteria for a plan unit development. Staff found there are 6, and staff found that 5 partially comply and 1 does not comply. Excuse me. To begin with, a variety of housing types, employments, opportunities, and commercial services. To begin with, the proposed PUD provides 68 acres of general commercial zoning, displaying that the PUD is providing potential employment opportunities and commercial services to the future. The PUD is also proposing single-family detached housing, and the proposed multifamily portion is allowed detached units on single lots to mirror the scale look of traditional single-family neighborhoods. However, due to the excess of existing and entitled single family and detached multifamily within the southeastern quadrant of the area, as well as the fact that low density single family residential is not supported within the 2030 comprehensive plan, the proposed 2-lot width dimensions that are that we mentioned earlier while looking at the residential lots does not provide sufficient diversity. Because of this, the proposed PUD does not include sufficient standards to ensure a variety of housing types. Staff had suggested to the applicant to incorporate some identification of a minimum or maximum number of units of attached and detached products, as well as providing what we have referred to in the past as a menu board option for residential development, which would assist in the housing diversity. Number 2, an orderly and creative arrangement of land uses. So as I mentioned before, we have the C3 transitioning into the MF1 into the ROS, which does show that gradual transition. Also, we mentioned before the height restriction of 35 feet for any commercial structure that is located within 100 feet of any of the residentially zoned properties. However, there does not appear to be a transition of uses from the Saddle Creek development to the north. Again, as we mentioned, we have the RS, the MF1, and the business park directly to the north, which would line up here. And again, there is some concerns with the intensity moving from the commercial back to the low density residential and then into the apartments and the business park. Okay. Next, a plan and integrated comprehensive transportation system. So the proposed PUD appears to encourage both pedestrian and vehicular connectivity throughout the site. However, the proposed PUD does not include any specific development standards to ensure that these connections do take place, leaving the possibility that connections may be removed in the future as the property develops. The applicant has provided a comp plan that shows that there are 3 main drives, one from Patriot Way, one from Lawhon Lane, and one from Belgian Road. And these do move throughout the property and connect internally to connect the residentially zoned portions to the non-residential portions. Also, the applicant has provided a map here that shows that there are fencing and masonry screening walls throughout the site, which will assist in the screening and the transition of some of the uses. Number 4, the provisions of cultural and recreational facilities. The developer is proposing to designate 9.6 acres of parkland. The proposed park also has a strong trail system, as you can see this outline here, throughout the property, linking the residential portion to the non-residential portion. Parkland credit was accepted by the Parks Board at their February 11th meeting. However, staff found that most of the language provided within the PUD pertaining to outdoor social spaces or parkland does not provide any assurance of development, and it does not provide any objective, measurable terms. The language described appears more to be more theoretical than plan-driven, which does not provide staff with clear regulations at the time of site development. Moving on to number 5, the location of general building to take maximum advantage of natural and man-made environments. The proposed PUD appears to centrally locate the parkland, as we mentioned, and it does encourage maintaining view corridors. However, the PUD does not include an exhibit that addresses the placement of buildings in relation to each other. However, as we saw earlier with all the different zoning standards, that there are design criteria, setbacks, height limitations to maximize the uses on the property. So we can see here the general concept plan provided by the applicant does provide or does depict all 3 zoning districts being established with the most intense uses along the most intense roadways. And lastly, number 6, the staging of development in a manner which can be accommodated by a timely provision of public utilities, facilities, and services. Staff found this does not comply. Currently, the city does not have wastewater capacity to service the proposed development. The proposed PUD includes standards that allow the developer to retain the right to determine if any of the required gravity wastewater line on site will be private or public. However, to serve the proposed development, the developer will need to build a master plan gravity line crossing State Highway 130 and the master plan regional lift station on the east side of State Highway 130 to service the project. Both of these will be required, I should say, to be dedicated and accepted by the city. So I understand that may have been a lot of information all at once. So just a quick recap over here of staff's findings with the PUD that we have some concern about. Number 1, there's direct conflict with the 2030 comprehensive plan and the city's vision for this particular corridor. Number 2, approval of this PUD will hinder the future residential development within the area and result in a complete reversal of the community center future land use designation. There are several areas of the PUD that hold subjective language that reads closely like a land use policy rather than an alternative zoning ordinance. The PUD displays conflicting land uses with adjacent properties in terms of intensity and transition of uses. We have some concerns with the utilities and the proposed impervious coverage percentages. And then lastly, as Georgetown continues to grow and develop, the city has expressed its importance to preserve certain corridors for non-residential development. This particular corridor within the southeastern portion of Georgetown has continuously been identified as an area intended to withhold a commercial and employment service land use. Whoops, too fast. Public notifications went out to within 300 feet to 28 property owners. Notice was placed in the Sun newspaper on March 21st. Signs were posted on the property, and to date, staff has not received any comments. Per the UDC, the Planning and Zoning Commission shall hold a public hearing and make a recommendation to the City Council. I'm here as long as several members of staff to any questions that you may have. I understand that we did touch a little bit on the utilities portion there. I believe Mr. David Monk from our engineering department is here with us this evening as well to answer any questions that you have. I spoke to the applicant earlier today and they said that they did have a presentation for you. Closed down a little bit early to get ready for the workshop. So if they had contacted me in the last hour, I haven't received it. But I believe that they are here with us. So when the applicant is ready and when the board is ready, I can stop sharing my screen and turn it over to the applicant. And with that, I will turn it back over to you.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Commissioners, do you have any questions for staff on this item?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a question so much as it seems like it's in direct conflict or opposition to the UDC. Wouldn't it be better for them to go and try and put together something that would fall within the UDC guidelines as opposed to trying to do something that is going to get shot down here as well as at City Council and everywhere else by being so in conflict and opposed to the UDC?
So that would likely be a better topic for the discussion period. I think that's a valid point, but let's get questions for, if you have questions for staff, and then we'll let the applicant speak, and then we can cover all those other items.
Can we hear from David on the utilities?
Yeah, Mr. Monk, are you?
Yeah.
On the...
If y'all can hear me, I'm here. It's David Monk, one of the utility engineers for the city. So this is in our wastewater master plan area. We've planned this out for years. We can serve this. This drainage basin goes over across 130 and it's to a regional lift station that's not there yet, but it has been, I mean, it is on the master plan and it would force back to Dove Springs. From engineering, we don't see that this is a big item in the zoning. It's in our master plan and we can serve it. We could even, the regional lift station, if it would work out, could even come to the west side of 130, but it has to work according to city policy. It can't be real deep. The wet well cannot be super deep, but it, we're here to serve it, and it is in our master plan, but it triggers a regional lift station in Force Main. I don't know if that answers your questions.
It does, Mr. Monk. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Questions for staff? Okay, then we can hear from share your input.
Good evening, commissioners. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank
Good
you.
evening. This is Peter Verdicchio at SEC Planning. I hope you all are doing well. Before we try to share our screen, I want to see Sophia, if it might be easier for you or cleaner for you to share your screen as you have a copy of our presentation.
I certainly can. You'll just need to let me know when to advance this slide.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yes, let me bring that up.
Thank you. You have any video?
There, we can see you now.
Perfect. Good evening, commissioners. Peter Verdicchio at SEC Planning. I'm going to take over here in a couple of minutes, try to address some of Michael and staff's comments and some of what I just heard from a couple of the commissioners there. But first, what I'd like to do is let Gene Lawhon introduce himself, share a little bit of his history in Georgetown, history with the property, and then also part of the process that has led us here this evening. And with that, Gene.
Good evening. I'm Gene Lawhon, and I'm here to represent the family. I have 6 siblings and my mother who are partnership on the family farm. My father bought that property in 1959. We've been born and raised here and employed in Georgetown, educated in Georgetown. And I want to thank each and every one of you for serving, because I understand what public service is. I spent 9 years on the school board, late 80s and through the 90s. And I know that public service has its pros and cons, and usually it's more cons than pros. And so I want to thank you for your service. We were approached by a few builders along about April 2019 as Saddle Creek was developing, whether we had interest in selling part of our property. We met as a family, decided yes, because my mother is soon to be 95, my oldest sibling is 75, youngest is 56, and this is our major asset of the family. And so it seemed like that was an opportune time, maybe divine intervention, that possibly we might be able to take an asset and get some liquidity out of it for future needs, primarily future health needs in the event that those come up. So we pursued that, and one builder came back and said, we withdraw any interest as your land is employment center. And so I set out to try to ask for an amendment of the land use map, not understanding at all. We are not developers. We are landowners. And I had no idea, and Michael will be the first one to tell you. I met with Michael, and I thought, man, we just asked for this change of land use, and we could possibly sell our property. Well, I had a rude awakening. With that, I was understanding as the process staff made me aware that the land use map was in proposed change at that time as well. And so I finally withdrew my application with P&Z in October of 2019. And Trendmaker came along, and they offered us a contract for 120 acres. We then began, we being Trendmaker primarily, but we began to have dialogue with staff, and okay, so we began to do so, and in December of 19, there was an open house at the Georgetown Library, which myself and our broker, Wade Todd, attended to look at the proposed land use map change. A senior staff person noticed us there because we had met with them a few times over the course of those few months, and brought to our attention the map and said, I think this is gonna help you out with what your intended purposes are, and definitely did. However, that land use map got changed at the 11th hour as the property owners to the north of us, what you would probably call the east side of 130. 130 runs east and west part of the time there, but it's either the north or the east, but properties north of us got their land in as all residential. That happened to change our percentages drastically. So we became 100% in either regional center or community center. Now, mind you, you're looking at 146 acres. We originally had 228. We still have about approximately 33, 18 on the east side of Patriot Way, and approximately 15 on the south side of Sam Houston, we still own as well. 146 abuts Saddle Creek. Felt like that was a transition for some residential development. With that said, we also dealt with the city on Patriot Way in Sam Houston. 26 acres of our property went for those roads. We were cordial, came to an agreement with the city. We had no problems with the city. We didn't have any cross problems at all. We got a fair price, what we thought. No, the city felt the same way. And so we have been good neighbors. We've been good citizens for 50-something years, maybe 60-something years, I guess, at this point. So we feel like that while it might, that two things. Number one, the land use map kind of got changed on us last minute. And number two, we have what's left of our 228 acre farm, 184 acres total, that based on the 2030 land use map, vast majority of that, not you, but the land use map is asking us to reserve that as commercial land. Mind you, there's no utilities out there. And our developer, Trendmaker, is willing and able to do that regional lift station and put in a sewer situation, it would allow commercial development. I think most of you understand that commercial development doesn't just happen. It happens when there's utilities on site. It happens when there's rooftops that support it. That's what this project would do. We ask you to strongly consider this proposal as Pete goes through it, and understand that we are also not in compliance with density, because we also understand that the direction that the city council has given in the very last few months, that dense multifamily is not a wish of theirs. Therefore, for us to get to an 18 unit density, we'd have to build dense multifamily, which is not wishes of the council at this time in Georgetown. So with that, I'll turn it over to Pete, and thank you all for your time and your service.
Thank you, Gene. I appreciate that. I just thought it'd be very helpful and beneficial to get some context of part of the reason why we're here this evening. Sophia, if you could go to slide number 4, please.
Yes. Can you all see my screen right now?
Yes.
Okay, then I'll move to number 4 then. There you go.
Perfect, thank you. So to piggyback on Gene's history, in late 2019, early 2020, both Trendmaker and Gene's family engaged our firm to help facilitate a land planning effort and discussion and working with city staff. For those of you that don't know me, I've worked in the city of Georgetown for 25 plus years, have very strong relationships built with the city staff over that time. So really what we did is we conducted several meetings with your staff, really with the effort to develop a plan that first balances comp plan guidelines, then also works to try to meet market conditions that are ever changing in the marketplace today. And like Gene noted, address infrastructure expansion. And you've heard David speak to it a little bit. We've sent several proposals, several options to the city staff on how to serve this entire property, as well as other surrounding lands that most likely would also be non-residential. So this PUD and this plan before you really becomes the impetus for bringing utilities to this land and converting it from pasture land to employment and retail opportunities. And the last thing worth noting that certainly influenced our plan, and I'll touch on a little bit more in a moment, is the landowner capabilities. As Gene mentioned, you're not sitting here this evening talking to a developer out of Dallas or a local Austin builder, developer holding land. This is a family. It's a family heritage piece of land. And really what they're looking at doing is, I'll call it estate planning for the future. And so with that said, that puts some limitations on us in terms of what we're able to design and commit to on the non-residential portions of this property. So admittedly, as a guy that has written more PUDs than I can count in the city, some of what Michael spoke to about vagueness was intentional, because we are leaning heavily on the UDC on the non-residential portions of this property. With that said, when we first started having those meetings with the city that I mentioned, both Wayne and Sophia were very helpful, guiding us in a direction that has led us to this evening. And as we were having those early meetings with that guidance, we were asked to take a holistic approach to this property. So while we have a home builder that has a product and a very specific business plan that they can implement on a portion of the property, as I noted, over half the property will be retained by a property owner that hopes to sell, would like to sell, but does not have the experience, finances, or desire to build those non-residential properties. Sophia, if we could move on to slide number 6. please. Thank you. This is an exhibit that is actually round 4 in a site planning effort. I'm sure this looks familiar to Sophia, Michael, David. These were the types of plans that we went in and presented with city staff and discussed and talked through the vision. So city staff has had this plan. They have seen this plan. They've offered feedback that has had this plan evolve and change over time. What's worth noting for you all is this land plan has 475 residential units on it. And that is a mix of 3 to 4 different types of residential products, all in that harmony of balance that we were just trying to talk about, with not too high of a density, but meeting the spirit and intent of the comp plan. But probably the most, well, actually, let me take that back. One other thing I did want to point out here, because it keeps coming up over and over, that we have residential abutting business park up in the north section there. And what you'll see is, naturally speaking, that's a low point. Now, within the city code, there isn't a zoning ordinance for detention ponds. But as you can see, that's our low spot. We don't have residential that will immediately back up to the business park zoning north of us, because that's the way God created the land. That's our low spot. That's where our detention facility will be, in that area. So that detention pond will create that buffer and transition between business park and residential. The last element on this page that I'd like to just touch on with y'all, and it's probably the most significant and in many ways kind of shocking part of this story. This site plan that you see for the 68 acres of non-residential that meets the hybrid of the UDC and our standards that we're asking for your consideration of, generates 675,000 square feet of non-residential development opportunity. Let me repeat that, 675,000 square feet. That's as much as some cities have in their downtown. So when we start talking about ratios and percentages and land uses and the vision, this PUD still provides those opportunities for an employment center, non-residential, strong employment tax-based opportunity in this quadrant of the city, while also providing a mix and variety of residential types also. So this PowerPoint, admittedly, I've got pages upon pages to address city staff's comments in your report. You know, like I said, I've done work in the city for decades, and I know the value that is placed on these criteria matrix, and the complies, partially complies, does not comply. I wanted to go through it all. If you guys will offer me the time, then I can walk through it all with you. I'm more than happy to do that. I keep thinking back to the commissioner's comment about why are they even here? And you know, I appreciate that kind of a comment, especially after a staff report like that. But I'll tell you why we're here. We have asked on several occasions to be able to have an opportunity for a workshop first, to be able to hear feedback and comments from the P&Z, as well as from the City Council. And for reasons that I still don't understand, we weren't provided that opportunity. So in some ways, I'd say this evening is that opportunity for a workshop with y'all.
No, it's not. I was actually gonna ask you to go ahead and wrap it up. I mean, you're
Okay.
way over time as it is.
Well, I appreciate that. You know, it's just, there's a lot of data here. You've heard one side of that story from the city staff's perspective. I appreciate the opportunity to share with you our perspective on it. And again, what I'll say in closing then, Commissioner, is we were put forth before me and this team back in early 2020, an effort and task to thread the needle. I mean, that's the best way to describe it. One of the team members here said that to me this evening. It's, you know, we're trying to thread the needle of balancing a comp plan and some comp plan targets that have been establishes guidelines that have suddenly become hard numbers instead of guidelines, against clear vision and comments and feedback that I've received and I've heard from the city council members during their council meetings in the last 4 or 5 months about the amount of multifamily in particular in this quadrant of the city. So I appreciate the time to be able to share with you a little bit of our why, and we'll be here for any questions, any dialogue that you'd like to have with us. And again, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Commissioners, okay, do you have any questions for the applicant? I know we had one earlier, so now may be a good time for that.
This is Kayla McCord. I didn't have a question earlier, but I do have one now. And I wanted to ask the applicant if consideration had been given to requesting an amendment to the comprehensive plan. Since a lot of this request runs somewhat counter to the future land use guidelines, or at least not in particular compliance with them, and certainly with the target ratios, especially as they apply to the community center. I'm just wondering, I've seen the city council putting a lot of weight on those target ratios and that type of thing. And I was just wondering if consideration had been given to trying to essentially get those designations changed. Has the city been approached about that?
Yes, ma'am. We had a meeting, gosh, it was probably about 3 or 4 months ago, as we were trying to make a decision whether to keep responding with a forced set of comments to the city staff or whether to proceed to this evening. And we did have a video. Matter of fact, our team was all sitting in this room while city staff and management was at their various offices. That meeting was attended by the city manager through several in the management level. And we were encouraged to view the comp plan as guidelines, not hard lines. And if we felt that we were following the spirit of that guidelines, to proceed forward. And that's why we find ourselves here this evening. And I appreciate your comment because I really didn't touch on it earlier. We have not taken this journey in a bubble. We have taken this journey since November of 2019 with the City of Georgetown staff and management together.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, any other question for the applicant? Okay, not hearing any. Let's see, do we have anyone signed up or anyone wishing to speak from the public on this item?
Chair, no, I do not see any hands raised or names in the chat at the moment.
Okay, then we can close the public hearing, and the floor would be open to a motion. I'll make a motion to recommend approval as presented, to possibly get this one moving along so we can get to the discussion portion.
I'll
This is
second it.
Commissioner Noble.
So
Tim Haney.
that was
Yeah.
Commissioner Haney. Okay. Okay, so any discussion?
Why are we going to approve something that is so obviously opposed to everything?
Hold on. You got to keep in mind that we're making a recommendation. So when it leaves here, it goes to council twice. So if we put
why would we recommend that they approve something that goes against what they've already dictated?
My second was to get the conversation going. You can vote yes or no.
Correct.
Well, that's what we were doing, is having a conversation, right? I'm looking for some thought process.
This is Doug Noble. The 2030 planning process was a guideline for the city. At least that's the way that we understood it when we were part of it. It wasn't a hard line of it has to be this, but more of a, we are looking for certain percentages at certain areas. But I think there is some flexibility with the city staff in there on that. And so I think we would, ultimately leave it up to the city council, but the 2030, in my mind, is just a guideline.
So, I mean, so to go back to your question, Commissioner Warren, I think you've got a big piece of property here, and you've got an applicant that's working towards creating multiple uses to it. Based on what the comp plan is, I mean, I don't know that if you strictly stuck to that, you're going to get somebody to come in and develop this as a business center. It's on a road, not a highly traveled road. It's not a property that's adjacent to the toll road. City council's obviously had a run of not approving multifamily projects, which this contains a portion of it. My guess is that either way, once this goes to city council, that they're likely going to not approve it based on that, but that's not for me to say. But it seems like the applicant's trying to make the best of their situation. So, that's not necessarily a reason to approve it, but that's kind of my thought process on it. I mean, it seems to be that they're working with what they have to some degree.
This is Kayla
So-
McCord. Travis,
Go
I
ahead,
really, oh, I'm sorry. Did I interrupt someone?
No, that's okay. Go ahead, Kayla.
I agree with the chairman on that. It seems that the demand in that part of the city is for more rooftops as opposed to significant commercial development, and especially regional center type of development. I'm a little bit concerned that we end up with a sea of rooftops and not enough supporting business in that part of the city. But at the same time, if the future land use guidelines aren't realistic, then I think consideration ought to be given to either using them as very general guidelines or and giving them perhaps a little less weight than we have been, or than the council has been in the last year or two, or changing the comp plan.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I mean, so the way that this sets up if you're looking at the ratios, when I was looking at this eats up a lot of the residential, but it appears that a lot of what's left in the area that's undeveloped would either front what are now, 2-lane roads that might eventually be larger roads, or fronts, the toll road, which is obviously a major road. So, I would lean towards it. Those properties likely would have a chance to be developed commercial, and the road facing portion of this has got a commercial component to it. So, I don't know that the I guess north west portion of this property is likely going to ever develop as a regional center. It abuts another neighborhood, and it seems from a continuity standpoint to me, looking at it, that likely is the highest and best use for that area. But that's just me.
So Travis, this is Sheree. If I hear it right, you've put forth a motion to approve. And Tim Haney has your motion. Is that correct?
Yes, that is currently where we are.
Okay.
Because we needed a motion in order to have a discussion.
Okay.
So any other discussion on that item or on that motion? If not, we can call a vote.
Well, to Mr. Monk, real quick, maybe well, I don't know if it's a discussion item or a question. There's still, my understanding is there's no utilities out there, so there's no wastewater or anything else. So how, and the city doesn't have the ability to put the wastewater there or the other utility requirements. So is that something that the city is going to be able to do, or did I not understand that from Mr. Monk correctly?
Well, it's a normal, I'll answer it now if I can. It's a normal wastewater extension, and it's Jonah water, and I think Jonah's water's in pretty good shape out here. So on the wastewater part of it, it's a normal wastewater extension, and we do have the area planned out. This is not an area where the city was going to take on that. It was going to be left up to a developer. But this one, is planned out and ready for a developer to do. Does that answer it?
Okay, so the developer will handle running the wastewater lines from the site.
Yes.
Yes, sir. This is the applicant. Yes, sir. That is our intent, and that's really a key part of this proposal before you. Is that is what the residential part is instrumental in, is extending those utilities to this property at the applicant's cost.
And this is Gene Lawhorn, and that will provide wastewater utilities for future commercial development. As I said in my opening remarks, commercial developers typically don't put that in. They want those utilities in there, and this would extend those utilities to that commercial portion, so that commercial development could, in fact, happen with those utilities in.
Okay, that answers my question.
Okay, thank you all. Any other discussion on this item? Okay, Myrna, could you call the roll?
Sheree Heinzman,
Yes.
Kayla McCord,
Yes.
Tim Haney,
No.
Travis Berthews,
Yes.
Jay Warren,
Oh.
Doug Noble,
Yes.
Chris Stanley.
Yes.
Okay, so that motion carries 5-2 on a recommendation of approval. So that takes us to our discussion items. Sophia?
No updates at this time, Chair.
Okay, no updates at this time. And I don't believe do we have any other board commission members currently serving that would have updates?
No, I do not believe so.
Okay, then we have a reminder that the next scheduled meeting is April 20th, 6 o'clock. Do we have any questions or comments from any of our alternate members? Okay, not hearing any of them, we can entertain a motion to adjourn.
This is Chris, so moved.
I'm still awake. I'll second it.
So let's see. I'm sorry, who was the motion by?
That was Chris Stanley,
Oh, yeah, okay.
the new guy.
Myrna, could you call the roll?
Carrie Heinzman,
Yes.
Kayla McCord,
Yes.
Tim Haney,
Yes.
Travis Berthews,
Yes.
Jay Warren,
Ma'am, yes, ma'am.
Doug Noble,
Yes.
Chris Stanley.
Yes.
Okay, that motion passes 7-0, 8:35, and we're adjourned. So thank you everybody for spending 3.5 hours with us this evening.
Thank you, guys.
All right. Thank you.